Welcome, friends and family. It's time for Jimmy Tebeau's Dam Radio Show. Today, we got the Bunk Police. The Bunk Police are in from the East and West Coast, and sitting here with me is CEO and founder who's going to tell us what the Bunk Police are. It's Adam Ochter. Welcome to the show.
Hey, thanks for having me.
Right on. And we should tell everyone why you're at the Lake of the Ozarks area. You're actually from Asheville, North Carolina, correct?
That's right.
And then you brought Kyle in from Los Angeles, who's a cameraman. He came in with you. And you guys came out to interview me for a documentary you're making, and that's going to be out in 2025. Can we talk about that just for a second?
Sure, absolutely. So, yeah, should be April 2025. We'll be releasing the documentary about some of the issues we've been having at music festivals for a long time. We try and distribute substance test kits there. And Jimmy actually has a pretty big part in that whole story because of the whole Camp Zoe, Schwagstock legal issue back in 2010, I think.
Right. So while they're in town interviewing me, I'm like, you guys should come on the radio show and let's let everyone know what the Bunk Police is. And I was going to describe it, but I think you should. What is Bunk Police? When did it start and why did it start? And where has it been? Where's it at now? And where are you going to go with it?
Sure, yep. So we started back in 2011, and what we do is we research, manufacture, and distribute substance test kits. So if somebody's taking MDMA, for instance, cocaine, they can make sure that it is what they want to take and not something completely different or dangerous like fentanyl. That's been our big issue over the last few years. We started back when I was in my last semester of college. I was going to college for marketing and, kind of saw this issue around campus, went to a music festival and started testing drugs with the police supply kits that I ordered from a forensic website. And so, started to notice that there was a bunch of MDMA specifically that was actually synthetic cathinones. You might know those as bath salts. And so I was one of the first people to uncover that whole issue with bath salts.
Wow. So 13 years now you've been doing this? Did I do the math right?
Yeah, exactly.
So you can get these products on your website, bunkpolice.com.
Yep, you got it.
And then you go to music festivals a lot of the time. Through the summer, you go on every weekend, or you just pick some big ones and then you make an appearance and you're just bringing awareness to that whole topic, aren't you? And then distribution of the kits or sales anyway.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, bringing awareness is the big part of it. Our biggest summer, I think I did 22 of them in a row. So yeah, that was every weekend. Thankfully, I have some people taking over for me now that cover a lot of that. We do a bunch of them.
And how's it been when you go to the festivals? Do all the promoters welcome you with open arms, or are some of them a little nervous?
Yeah, so that's exactly what we're making this documentary about. They give us tons of issues. They don't want to admit that drug use is going on there. They're worried about liability, and so we have to sneak everything in the middle of the night. Sometimes throw our harm reduction supplies over fences, bribe security guards, the whole 9 yards. So yeah, it's a whole thing.
But what you're doing is technically not illegal, correct?
That is correct. Yeah, I mean, it's in a gray area in some states, but it's more and more legal every day. In fact, the federal government is even distributing these test kits by the million at this point.
Shouldn't this be available like at gas stations and head shops, don't you think, or dispensaries anyway?
Yeah, well, that's exactly what we're working on right now. So we've been working on a product that allows us to have a 3-year shelf life and have these life-saving kits in all kinds of different establishments, from pharmacies to head shops to to sex shops, gas stations, whatever establishment I might find the counterculture essentially.
Because it seems like people are doing these drugs even though they're illegal. They're getting them somewhere. And from what I've been hearing is sometimes someone gets cocaine and they snort a line of it and they're dead. That happened to a musician friend of mine. Apparently there was fentanyl in it. So had they tested it, they would have known, and then maybe they wouldn't have died.
Yeah, absolutely. No, that's a pretty common problem is fentanyl and cocaine, or benzos like Xanax. Definitely opiates. It's a huge issue, and a $1 to $2 kit can definitely save your lives. If Prince, for instance, had tested his Vicodin, or if Little Peep had tested his, then they'd still be around today.
There's some places you go that do welcome you, though, isn't there? A few festivals?
Yeah, there are a few, but our reputation is to go to the places where we're not allowed. People need them nationwide, worldwide, so we're trying to be everywhere we can.
So, like, say you go to Bonnaroo and security doesn't want you there. Do they give you a hard time? Do they make you leave? Do they take your stuff? What's happened?
Yeah, no, Bonnaroo specifically has done all of those things. They throw us out of events several times and confiscated over $12,000 worth of test kits, turned them over to the sheriff, and then told us that we could go talk to him about getting them back, and we opted not to do that. We just let him keep them.
That's a crazy adventure you've been on, but it seems to be breaking more mainstream as far as what I've been seeing. The fact that here in Missouri, marijuana is recreational now, and it's kind of like just drinking a beer. And it seems like in a number of states that psychedelic mushrooms, are becoming more popular. Legal, isn't it? Isn't it legal? You would know the answer to this. Are mushrooms legal in a couple states?
I think decriminalize is the way that they're going about it. It's not quite legal yet, but we're getting there.
So, like, that's Oregon, the state of Oregon, maybe in California, it's decriminalized?
Yeah, so we're seeing a lot of progress in Colorado, specifically Denver, Michigan. The Ann Arbor area is coming a long way with that. And then, up in Oregon, lots of work going on there.
And then maybe some East Coast locations. But it seems like, well, talking about mushrooms, how do you test mushrooms? Is there a test kit for that?
Yeah, we have a couple different test kits. So you can make sure that they actually have psilocybin or psilocin in the mushroom. And you can also, with our Q test, see how much of the active ingredient are in your mushrooms.
More people should probably know about these products, and is that part of the reason you're doing the documentaries, is to bring more awareness to what you're doing?
Yeah, absolutely. There are lots of stories that need to be told. Generally, we're trying to keep people safe from all kinds of different scary circumstances, and just let them know about the test kits, of course.
That first documentary you did, it seemed like you and Kyle were running around at festivals. And how would you do that? Didn't you say you would walk into campsites and ask people what they were, if they needed anything tested or something?
Yeah, no, those were the early days. That was back in 2014. And we would just kind of go into random campsites, see if they were doing drugs, and then test them right there, in front of them. And so we would get some really wild reactions. People, finding out that they're on bath salts right there in that moment. It's a little shocking.
I was looking at your website. So these tests are basically, it looks like a little like a bottle of Visine type thing. Sure. And there's droplets of some sort of chemical, and you drop. How does it work?
Yeah, so we have a bunch of different chemicals that are for different substances, and you essentially just put a little bit of your substance in a test tube, add a couple drops of the chemical, and it's going to change colors. You match it up to a chart, and that'll tell you what it is.
On TV, you see these shows where the police pull somebody over and they find some white powder, and then they do a field test where they put some sort of liquid, and it turns. Is it like that, or is it the exact same thing, or a little different?
Yeah, that's actually where we got the idea for the most part. Those were the first kits that I used back in 2011. Was from a police supply website, and they actually sent them to my dorm room, despite the fact that they were for police use only. And so we went and we found their patents and kind of reverse engineered them, hired a chemist, got around their patents, and made our own version. That can be, a little more suited to the use that we have them for.
More generic and user-friendly and more readily available.
Mm-hmm, absolutely. And also just straight up superior, too. We're able to detect more substances with our test kits than they are with theirs.
So people can go to your website. What is it, bunkpolice.com?
Yep, you got it.
And then there's a store on there, correct?
Mm-hmm.
And then what's the average price of a kit, and how many tests do you get?
Yeah, so we have the fentanyl strips for I think a dollar to $2 for those, and then if you wanted an MDMA kit, it would be from $20 up to 45, I think, depending on how far you want to take it. We also have laboratory testing too, so if you want to send it over to Spain and have it fully analyzed with a percentage readout and everything, we can also do that.
Okay, so say you spend the $20. How many tests of that for the MDMA one?
That'd be 20 or 100 for 20. Yep.
100 tests for $20.
That's right. Yep.
So if you got spent $20, you'd have I don't know if I know anyone that does MDMA that often. I haven't really even been seeing that much, although I'm 57 years old now, and maybe I'm not in the scene as much. But when I would go to festivals, I would see drug use happening. It wasn't like rampant and crazy if you really looked for it and you were talking to people and someone's like, oh yeah, I'm tripping. It's like, oh cool. It's not like everyone was, and that was real common to me because I was always in bands playing at other festivals, and then I was putting on festivals, and what was happening at the festivals I put on was the same thing I was seeing everywhere. Now you've been to hundreds of festivals with the goal of what drugs are going on here, who's on what's the quality. Like when I went to the festivals, I was a musician, and sure, I wasn't there to do a study on it, but what you've seen, is there just drug use at every festival you've ever went to, or is there a few that it's like there was nothing?
Yeah, I'd say there were a few where there wasn't, visible drug use, family-oriented events especially. You don't really see that sort of thing as much, but, it's a scale. You have, that sort of situation all the way to the kind of, harder core EDM events where, like, drugs are why people are there for the most part.
Okay, so what you're saying is the events featuring electronic music would maybe have a little bit more use with, I'm guessing, MDMA, which is also known as ecstasy. Is it known as something else too?
Yeah,
Molly.
Molly's, yep, what they're calling it for sure. Yeah, no, it's really heavy in that scene with MDMA, but it kind of depends on which portion of the scene too. It's not just one big thing. There are portions, like for instance, the more like dubstep, rhythm oriented genres. They're going to be heavier into the ketamine and cocaine with MDMA as well.
Ketamine, really? I rarely hear that word. People are doing ketamine, and isn't that like a horse tranquilizer?
Yeah, it sure is. But ketamine has actually come a long way generally since back in the 90s, where it was first in the rave scene and whatnot. It is being prescribed for depression and anxiety now. So people are taking advantage of it in a clinical setting, and because of that, it's become more popular in recreational settings too.
Ketamine, wow. I just picture somebody doing that and they're doing the worm on the ground moaning, but I guess if you do it in small amounts or something, I don't know. It's like, yeah. I just can't think like, oh, I want to do that. But people are doing it. So, and if they buy, they can't go to a store and buy this ketamine. They got to get it on the streets, right?
You can actually have it prescribed by your doctor now in small amounts.
Really? Okay.
Yeah, but no, the people that are taking it at a festival they're getting it from the street, as you want to call it, but usually somebody that comes into their campsite at the festival. That's how it happens.
So when they do, they can test it to make sure it's actually ketamine.
Yep, exactly. And we tell people to test it before they buy it. It's kind of like drug deal insurance. You want to make sure you don't get ripped off too. That's part of it.
Oh, that's fantastic that you guys are bringing awareness to this whole thing. So that first documentary that you made, how would people find that on the internet? Do you guys have a YouTube channel?
Yeah, we do. You can find it by searching "What's in My Baggie" on YouTube, and we also have another website that has more information about this sort of thing. It's called InfiniteTransparency.com, and that's for our nonprofit entity.
Okay, and on the bunkpolice.com, is there a link to that movie from there?
Absolutely. Yep.
Okay. Now, I want to talk a little bit about your second documentary. The one that we were filming yesterday is going to be the third one, which we're looking at 2025 for that release. But the second one, didn't you say you guys went to Mexico and you were going into pharmacies down there? Can we hear that story?
Yeah, no, this is definitely one of the wildest things I've ever done personally. But yeah, we went down to Mexico with hidden cameras and went to 7 different beach and border towns and went into, yeah, over 100 pharmacies with hidden cameras. So we were able to capture all kinds of wild interactions with these pharmacists who we learned later actually part of the cartel. So these are licensed Mexican pharmacies selling illegal substances like oxycodone and Adderall and Xanax and that sort of thing.
As just a tourist, you could just walk in without a prescription and ask for OxyContin, and they would sell it to you. Am I understanding that correctly?
Yep, they would. But you know what we ended up finding out through lab testing is that it's not oxycodone, it's not OxyContin. It is more often than not fentanyl. It was over 60% of samples. And when it comes to the Adderall that was being sold, that was all methamphetamine. We didn't find a real sample across the board.
So you could just be a tourist, walk in, and then you think you're getting OxyContin or Adderall, and it's something totally. Did you say methamphetamine?
That's right. Yep. They were selling methamphetamine as Adderall. And people go down to Mexico to get that for their kids with ADHD. So they are literally selling meth to children. That's not an exaggeration.
If people had these test kits, they could figure that out.
Yes, they could.
Well, when they're selling that, like when I think of methamphetamine, I'm thinking, dust in a baggie or, some sort of powder in a baggie. But what do? They press it into a pill and then they put it in some professional packaging with a nice label on it?
They sure do. Yeah. No, I suppose, get the packaging pictures off of the internet and then make a box specifically for Adderall. They put it in professional gel caps, just like you would see in a prescription bottle, and they sell it direct to the consumer there.
And you can see this in that documentary. I haven't got a chance to watch it yet, but and then you could find a link to it from the websites, right? Bunkpolice.com.
Yeah.
What's that one called?
That's called poison pills. Yeah.
Poison pills, and it's most of you in Mexico, and you went to over 100 pharmacies.
That's right.
Now, did any of those did you turn in any of this evidence, or did you? I guess if the cartel's running it, there's nothing you can do.
Right. Now, we didn't turn in evidence to, any government agency or like anything like that, but we did get quite a bit of news coverage, both when we were down there filming and when we released the documentary. And over 40 pharmacies ended up getting shut down in Mexico by the Mexican Navy within about a month of us releasing our documentary.
Oh, I see. Because, that was after the fact. Now, when you were going into any of these pharmacies, did you ever ask for a quantity? Or most people are probably going in for like a bottle of 100 pills or 50 pills. Did you ask for anything more than that? And would they do something like that?
Right. Yeah. No, that ended up being how we got ourselves into a little bit of trouble. So while I was in Tijuana, one of the pharmacists randomly offered me a large quantity of pills. He offered me 10,000 of them, and that surprised me. And so, the next few pharmacies, I asked. I just kind of wanted to see how many were possible and what I could capture on hidden camera. And so that ended up raising an alarm down in Cabo. Between these pharmacies, and we actually ended up capturing one of the cartel pharmacists literally threatening to cut my head off. That's in the documentary.
Well, yeah, I hear horror stories of tourists being killed, or just even the locals or the cartels killing each other. It makes me scared to go down there. But then I hear a number of people are moving there in certain communities, and that's probably where some of these pharmacies are. Are these pharmacies just in the tourist towns, or were they in the local yokel towns?
No, yeah, it's just the tourist towns, mostly down by the beach, where you'd find American tourists specifically.
Because American tourists maybe have the money, and the people around there, they're not really doing the cocaine or the pills. What are they into?
I think, alcohol and good Mexican food for the most part. Yeah, no, it's mostly just Americans that are down there doing these benzos like Xanax and painkillers and whatnot. There's not another country on the planet that does those drugs in the way that Americans do.
Wow. So when people say they're going for a vacation in Mexico, they're maybe it's part of, oh, let's go do some drugs. I know I went to Jamaica once, and of course I was all excited to smoke the local weed. It's yeah, surprise, I smoke weed, everyone. But you wouldn't have guessed, right? But what surprised me in Jamaica is that the weed that I was able to get, from whatever, buying from the guys on the beach or whatever, because they didn't have dispensaries. I still don't think they do, but then a lot of people were selling it. But it was good. But I guess in Missouri, I know the right people, and now there's dispensaries everywhere. But I thought the weed here was a lot better than in Jamaica. I think just the big thing was Jamaica had always been smoking it, and even when it was illegal in the United States, and just the imagery of the people with dreadlocks smoking weed on the beach. But then, when you told me that story about going to Mexico, I'm like, that's pretty scary, and that took probably a while to film all that and then to edit it, right?
It did, yeah. No, we were down there filming for, I think, about 3 weeks. And then, yeah, in order to gather all of the interviews we needed from, professionals, including government officials, it took about another year to do that and edit it.
Wow, that's great. And it's cool you're working on this third one, which will probably be a year-long project.
We're trying to do this one a little quicker. We've been working on it since June, and we're trying to get it out in mid-April this year.
Yeah. Can you tell everyone who the guy was you were going to interview before me?
Oh, yep. No, it was Disco Donnie. We were going to be interviewing him down in Houston, but unfortunately had a bit of a medical issue, and we had to delay. So we're going to see him in Austin in a couple weeks.
Oh, that's cool. And who else are you interviewing for this new documentary?
Yeah, so we have a couple of other interesting folks. Representative from MAPS, which is a psychedelic society essentially that does the research to legalize MDMA. They've been doing a lot of work on that. We also have this really interesting character named Teddy, who we ran into at a music festival in 2017, and our test kits came up as positive for fentanyl with the cocaine that he was selling. So we ended up tracking him down and having him dispose of that substance, and he's made a huge change in his life. He's a different person now.
He's no longer a coke dealer.
He is definitely not a coke dealer. He is a mushroom grower in the Denver decriminalized system that they have there. So yeah, he's doing really good.
What have you seen? You get around the country a lot more than me. I'm a traveling musician. I haven't been doing it so much as lately, but you get around a lot more. What's the overall vibe with drug use that you've seen? Is it on an upswing or it's kind of down? Because you've been studying it for 13 years now, because it's been your business to do so. Is it getting worse, or people are still doing it, but they're doing it more gracefully, or is it just out of hand and what's going on and we need to do something?
Oh, I mean that's a complex question. I think in the certain little niche social groups that we interact, people are getting much more responsible. The more we teach them about test kits and whatnot, the better decisions they seem to be making. But when it comes to the U.S. as a whole, we've definitely seen a huge increase in drug use and overdose rates since the pandemic, and even a little bit before that. We're actually looking at drug overdose as being the leading cause of death for Americans between the age of 19 and 45, and that's over 100,000 people per year. It's gone down a little bit this year, but we're just hopeful that continues.
That's a big number. Well, I've heard horror stories coming out of Portland where there's like certain neighborhoods where there's like drug zombies walking around. Have you been through any of those neighborhoods?
Yeah, I've been in those neighborhoods all over the U.S. I don't think there is any larger city that is completely without those issues at this point. Rates of homelessness are going through the roof, and drug abuse. But yeah, Portland specifically does have a pretty bad problem, due to some decisions that they made a couple years ago when it comes to decriminalization. But yeah, no, it's an interesting topic for sure.
Did I hear that right? They decriminalized all drugs? Is that what they did? Do you know?
Right. Yeah, no, I do know a little bit about that. So they kind of followed in the footsteps of Portugal, which decriminalized all drugs back in 2001. It's been over 20 years there. But kind of the difference between what happened in Portugal and what happened in Portland is that when Portugal decriminalized drugs, they made sure that they had very specific social services for people that were caught with drugs. So when you were caught with them, you went in front of like a board of people that would kind of see why you were making that decision, make sure that you had the resources that you need. If you need counseling to try and get your life together, if you need therapy or something like that, they had all of those resources set up. Now, when it comes to Portland, I respect them for trying, but they also did not set up those same systems. So it ended up being kind of just a free-for-all, and that did backfire a little bit on them.
Yeah, because I hear there's a homelessness issue. Property values are dropping. People are moving out of town. I heard there's some neighborhoods maybe in Philadelphia or something that's zombie land. You're from kind of the East Coast. You get up into the Northeast and distribute kits up there. I figured those neighborhoods would really need what you're providing.
Yeah, no, absolutely. We actually did an interview for this new documentary in Philadelphia with a gentleman named Detective Bruckner, and he's with an organization that is essentially police officers that believe in a lack of prohibition. They believe in a world where we have safer drug use and it's more accepted generally, and we have harm reduction tools available for people. And so anyways, when we were there in Philadelphia, we definitely saw the depth of the issue there and heard some horror stories about certain parts of Philly that have been very, very badly struck by drug abuse and overdose.
Yeah, on YouTube, I found this guy's YouTube channel where he just kind of goes down through those neighborhoods and drives slow through them and hangs the camera out the window, and some of it is pretty crazy because there's homelessness, there's people like I don't know, I've never done heroin, but I guess they're just like nodding out on the side of the streets.
Yeah.
And then but I've lived in Missouri my whole life, and I don't know if I've ever even had a friend that says, "Oh, I've done heroin." I've never even seen it, but I imagine in San Francisco or Portland or the Northeast that would be more of an issue. And then what is heroin, and are you really getting heroin, and is it a derivative of?
Right. So, that whole situation has changed drastically over the last, especially 7 years or so. So you really don't find heroin at all anymore in the U.S. And the reason being is it's really expensive to manufacture that as compared to something like fentanyl. And so we're seeing fentanyl being distributed as heroin, and now people are using fentanyl by itself after, kind of having been in this situation for a few years. And then we're also seeing oxycodone with fentanyl as well. So that's what people are taking when it comes to painkillers. And then the really scary scenes that you're seeing in Philadelphia and elsewhere in Portland, like it's a combination of things. It's not just fentanyl. It's fentanyl, and xylazine is the big one, or also benzodiazepines like Xanax. So they're mixing a couple things, and that's when you see people just kind of in a heap on the ground or bent over, and that's the really scary version of all this.
Why would these guys mix all this stuff together? Does that make it, instead of just selling heroin, why do they got to mix some stuff in? Does that mean they get more weight without less of their original product or something, and the stuff they're adding is cheaper, or what's the reasoning?
Yeah, there are a couple different reasons, but just the price point of manufacturing this stuff is the big one. Fentanyl is insanely cheap to manufacture. You can buy the precursor chemicals or the ingredients for it online from China and manufacture it pretty easily in your own house. And so the profit margin on creating, say, a gram of fentanyl and then selling it as something else, you're looking at, in some cases, up to 10,000 times your investment in like purchasing this, making it, and selling it on the street. Whereas when it comes to heroin, that's something that needs to be refined from a plant, from a poppy plant, and most of those are over in Afghanistan and different parts of the Middle East. So it's a lot more difficult to get the sap from this plant over here in the form of heroin and refining it down, as opposed to just making the synthetic drug here in the U.S.
When I was younger and I first started smoking weed, and I was like 17 or 18, I remember there was a few times that some of my younger friends are like, hey, check it out. I got some opium. Let's smoke that with the weed. And I don't think it was real opium, because later I found out what real opium is. And then you hear about the opium dens of Chinatown in San Francisco, where like the guy had to hold the pipe to your face and you gently drew it in. Like, that's basically heroin. I think the stuff that we were smoking as kids that was supposedly opium was just something you bought out of the back of a magazine that was basically incense.
Yeah. Specifically, it was Lasme dupe incense, and there is a huge group in the U.S. that has been selling exactly that at music festivals since like the early 80s.
Oh, okay. Are they calling it opium?
They are. It looks very similar, but if you know what you're looking for, it's not anywhere close.
I remember my friend would be like, "Now you got to smoke it. You got to put it in a bowl with weed, and you got to smoke a lot of weed with it for it to really work." And I'm like, at that point, you were just getting high on the weed.
Exactly.
And then it adds kind of a little taste to it. So, if any listeners are out there, oh, by the way, if you're just tuning in, this is Dam Radio. Jimmy Tebeau hosting, and Adam Ochter in from the East Coast, CEO, founder of Bunk Police. Check him out at bunkpolice.com. Hey, maybe we should take a break and play a song. I think we should play the song Cocaine by Eric Clapton. What do you think?
Sounds about right.
All right. We'll be right back. Well, this is copyrighted material, so YouTube and Facebook, etc., will not let us play it without flagging us. So what I did is I put a link to the YouTube video of this smoking live version of Cocaine by Eric Clapton. But it'll be in the description of this Dam Radio Show video. So check it out, and now back to our regular programming. Cocaine by Eric Clapton. We figured that song was fitting for the show today because we're talking about drugs. This is Jimmy Tebeau on Dam Radio with Adam Ochter with the Bunk Police. I know you got some more stories, something about Europe, and how are you testing all these and coming up with all this research? Is that done in the U.S.?
Right. So, yeah, no, it's definitely not done in the U.S. Because of legal issues with possessing all of these substances, right? So in order to make these test kits, we need to acquire not just, mainstream drugs like cocaine and heroin and MDMA, but also all of the different hundreds of research chemicals that we're trying to detect with our test kits. So, we use the dark web, and back in the day, things like Silk Road and other markets in order to acquire pure samples of these substances so that we can research and manufacture our test kits.
So there's a place in Europe that is it a lab that you guys set up, or there's one there that you just kind of hired to help you out, or how's that work?
Yeah, so a little bit of both. We've been working with a laboratory in Spain, in Barcelona, Spain, for over 10 years now. They've helped out a lot, and we also did build our own laboratory in Ljubljana, Slovenia, of all places, just because their laws are a little bit more lax when it comes to these things, and they're pretty understanding when it comes to the mission that we're on. And so, yeah, we had that lab for about 2 years over there doing our research.
Then you've been there. You've been to Europe a number of times. Correct?
Dozens of times. Yep, and I actually lived in Ljubljana for over a year.
Okay, I want to hear some of those stories. And then you had to acquire drugs and take them across the border to get them to the lab so they could test them, and then figure out how to make kits to test for the adulterants.
That's right. Yep, you got it.
Okay.
So yeah, well done. Yep. So we were, originally doing this research in Belgium. And so we had an issue with the person that was doing that research, but he had, over 100 different samples of various bizarre research chemicals and illegal drugs. And so those needed to be transported somehow from Belgium down to Spain. And so I didn't want to ask anybody to do that. So I did it myself. So I took all of that via a bus across several borders through Europe, from Belgium to Spain.
Like a public bus system?
That's right. Yeah.
You just bought a ticket and got on the bus.
That's right. Just, put it in my bag, hoped I didn't get searched. There was definitely a white knuckle moment where they were checking my passport, and spent quite a bit of extra time looking through my stamps. I think they could just see that I had been all over the place and they were interested, but I thought they were gonna grill me. But I got through.
You just put it in your suitcase?
Essentially, yeah.
Like a secret compartment or whatever?
Yeah, a little. It wasn't right there in the
It wasn't the first thing they were gonna. Yeah.
No.
You hear about stories like that in the airport. Where somebody just doesn't think about it and they pop it open. But then you also hear about the secret compartments and the dog sniffs it and they got to tear the whole thing apart. So it wasn't like you were crawling on your belly across borders or whatever. You were just hopping on the bus.
Yeah, pretty much.
Now the laws over there, are they more lax in the U.S.? Like, say you got pulled over and they found marijuana on you. You're going to jail, or they're just going to let you go?
Yeah, well, when it comes to marijuana in particular at this moment, it's definitely more lax than it is here in the U.S., at least in some areas. It really depends, because, Europe's made up of a bunch of different countries. But when it comes to the stuff that we were doing, it was still quite illegal, especially when I was in, like, the deeper parts of this research about, 8-10 years ago. So really what we were just looking at, especially with places like Slovenia, is like, if you're going to go to prison for some of this work, like, you might as well be in a nice prison. And they have some of the nicest in the world over there in Europe. So it's better than the situation that we have here.
We got the Bunk Police here that came in. Well, we were talking to Adam. He came in from Asheville, North Carolina. And now we have Kyle Peters, who's affiliated with the organization. And you came in from Los Angeles, correct?
I did. I've been I was born and raised in California, so that's kind of the only home I've ever known.
And you've been with Bunk Police for a while, and you help make these documentaries, and you go to these festivals too, and help set up the booth and do all that?
So it actually, I had a group of friends. We used to go to music festivals all the time. We had a little circuit that we called Festival Fest, and we'd get in a car and do, 12,000 miles in a month and a half, just hitting up festival after festival. One of the years, we had gotten, my friends who had done that trip, I didn't go on it that year, but right before, the group had gotten a book of what we all thought was acid. And it turned out that it was a research chemical. And the guy who sold it said, hey, it's really weak. You should, maybe take 2. And so at one of the festivals, my buddy took 2 for breakfast and immediately started having a bad time.
Oh, no.
And that was when our other friend, who was scouring, I think it was at Bonnaroo, and met the Bunk Police and was like, hey, we've got a situation. And so Adam had come over, tested everything, was like, hey, you actually have this research chemical. It's not LSD. You're going to be fine, but like the next 20 hours are probably going to be, a bit of a ride. And so our friend was in the back of the car with the AC just blasting down on him while he rode that through. And then the rest of that summer, the schedules matched up between Festival Fest and Bunk Police. And so there was a friendship that formed there. And then the next spring, we were at Coachella, and we had brought in a bunch of single-use test kits. And we were trying to get people to just to educate. Hey, like, we want to see how bad the problem is, if it's as bad in California as it was in the South. And everyone told us, no, I don't want you testing my drugs. I don't want to know what's in this bag. I'm taking it regardless. And that's the end of it. And my friend and I got back to our campsite, and we were angry and dejected. And finally, we just kind of looked at each other and said, someone's got to pick up a camera and tell this story, because people don't realize how bad it is. And so that summer, we did a 13,000-mile road trip with the cameras. And we went up to people and we asked them, hey, may we test your drugs for free? With the caveat of we're filming this. And we got the reactions. And once we got the reactions from people, then they wanted to like sit down and tell us some of their stories that as they were connecting the dots between these bath salts, these research chemicals, and the bad experiences that they'd had at previous shows, and kind of just running through and being like, oh my God, this has been a problem for a while. And we gathered all of that up. We interviewed, some professionals. We had a couple professors and a few other folks, and just kind of presented it as like, hey, this is what's going on, and you really need to test everything. And so that's how it all started. That's how we got What's in My Baggie shot. And, there was a little back and forth between how brazen we should be, and that evolved. That was thrown out the window on day one. At first we were like, well, maybe we shouldn't be the ones testing. Maybe we should film them testing it. And finally, we were like, you guys don't really understand. Here, just give me your bag.
And you were doing.
I can do this much quicker, and we'll get you your answers. And so that kind of started the whole relationship, between myself and Bunk Police, and came back a little bit later this last year and jumped back in with Poison Pills.
I had to ask you, you're in Los Angeles. You live in Los Angeles. Have you been into some of these neighborhoods where there's these drug zombies are walking around?
Yeah. So for a few years, I was dating someone who lived right next to Skid Row. And so my drive home every night was through the homeless encampments there, and they ballooned. I also did the census in 2020. I worked that, and that included the homeless count. And so that was one full overnight experience of not just seeing, but interacting with all of the homeless people there and the people who were on various substances. And over the years of doing that drive, a few times a week, you started to hear the groans of people whenever there was like a new shift in what was being distributed. You could hear it in the I hate to say it because it's what everyone uses and sounds so dehumanizing, but the zombie effect of people just glazed eyes, wandering in the middle of the street, slowly walking towards my car, just have to kind of push through and hope that you don't get stopped. Not because you're necessarily going to end in a violent situation, but once you're in there, you just want to go home.
Yeah, that's it's hard for me to understand that, but these people are doing drugs every single day, illegal drugs, and they're addicted, and it's just an everyday part of their life. So, like, they would benefit from these test kits, but then I'm thinking, are they going to use them? And they should, because a number of those people are dying.
So in that instance, I feel that the homeless services are the group that would really benefit from having an array of test kits that they could post up somewhere around Skid Row, because they're interacting with these folks regularly, and offer that as a, way to spot check or, send them to wherever they're most comfortable doing that. And it would have a huge effect. I don't know that it would stop because, the pills that they were taking, the blues they're called, are like $2 a piece. And so it's an incredibly cheap high that makes you forget how miserable life on Skid Row is.
You make the help make you the documentaries. Is there anything you can tell us about this one you're working on now? And when it's coming out in April is what you're shooting for?
Yeah, so we want to get it pushed out before the start of next festival season. We're really hoping that we can make a splash with the organizations and admins of these festivals, not even necessarily, hey, you should buy a bunch of our kits and pay us, but like just let us show up and do our thing. We don't need anything other than permission to be there and tell people what we're doing. And, we're pretty good at getting people to us, getting people to leave with the kits and armed with knowledge. So really just if everyone could get out of our way, we could make such a bigger splash. And we want to show that, like, all of these fears that people have are so unfounded that it's not grounded in reality. You know, the truth of the matter is, if you have us selling test kits at your festival, you're not going to incur a legal liability. No one's going to claim that you're a drug den because you're trying to stop, in the middle of the worst overdose crisis in human history, unnecessary death.
So basically, you're setting up like a 10 by 10 easy up with some tables, and you're selling the product, the test kits. But then can people just walk up and say, "Hey, can you test this for me?"
So that part gets a little fuzzier because, you know, you're then handling people's. It's a lot easier to empower someone because then you turn them back into their friend group, the ecosystems that they're existing in, and they can then empower the people around them and have a greater splash effect. That's kind of, you know, helping people to help themselves and their community is really the most powerful way to go about it. In a perfect world, yeah, we would have, you know, a shield that would allow us to set up, test everything. You know, it's starting to happen at some of these festivals. It would be great if we could codify that into law so that, you know, the lawyers who are advising the bigger festivals wouldn't have to be so on edge.
I've been to a lot of festivals, and just about everyone I've been to, especially the bigger ones, have like a medical station that treats a variety of things: bee stings, broken legs, I'm too drunk, I'm dehydrated, I haven't eaten in 2 days, or I'm just really high on I don't know what, you know, am I okay? Do I need to go to the hospital? And you'd think that these test kits would be available there.
Yeah, that would be another great spot, especially if you're an EMT and you're trying to figure out if someone comes and they say, you know, I'm way too high. It would help if they could also procure what you're way too high on, because that would help, you know, okay, maybe you need some fluids, maybe you need just a little quiet space. Maybe you just need a juice box and a banana and some headphones, but maybe you do need intervention. And, you know, nobody's ever been hindered by more knowledge being available. So really getting that out is kind of the goal, making it just so normal, really normalizing the whole experience so that it's, you know, part of the step process. Oh, you're having a bad time? Did you test what you have? Do you have any left that we can test? That would be a great step towards harm reduction at these festival spaces. You know, we have Narcan everywhere now. You've got these little Nalox boxes in high school gyms, and it would be great to take that next step from, you know, that's a triage harm reduction. The harm is done, and you're trying to reverse the course. We offer a path to prevent it in the first place.
Yeah, because if you get a mystery pill and someone's saying it's one thing. Now, you and Adam brought this up a few times, and I didn't realize something like this was happening. So somebody wants to sell a pill that's like, oh, this is MDA, this is ecstasy, but really they're coming up with something in the laboratory that's just a few molecules off. And would you call it a test chemical or a
research chemical? Research
chemical. So there's a lot of that going on, to where people are like, oh, this is an Adderall pill, but it's really some sort of research chemical.
So you get a lot of that, and especially now with computing power being as much as it is, you can kind of fold those molecules and try and figure it out. I always used to joke with people, you know, they're called research chemicals, but really you're the research. There's no research done in a lab on this. It's just taken out to the street and you're the guinea pig.
And sometimes it doesn't work. I remember being at this one festival where I don't know what was going around. There was some shady guy, you know, camel jawed out with a backpack and a wild look in his eye. And he was going from campsite to campsite, and he was peddling something that I think he was calling, what was he calling it? He was probably calling it ecstasy. And people were taking it, and like they would take it, and then sometime the next day they would just hit the ground and start fishing out. And it was the same weekend that Lost Lands was happening, and there was a rash of it there. And it seemed like there was somebody in a lab that made some research chemicals that they thought would have a similar effect of ecstasy. it didn't go well with people. And I remember the guy that the festival I was at. I later saw that security kind of figured it out because people were complaining. It's like that's not supposed to happen when on any drug. Why would you pay money for something that's going to make you fish out on the ground and have some convulsions for a little bit and make you pass out? And then it's like residual. It's like the next day or 8 hours later or something. And then was that high worth it? And was that the right high they were looking for? And I guess we should say through this whole show, we're not encouraging people to go out and do illegal drugs. In fact, drugs are bad. You shouldn't do drugs. But if you do, you should get these test kits.
Right. 100%. I've always found that one of the easiest pathways to convince someone to not do a drug is to show them what's actually in the drug they're about to take. And then you get some second questions, wait a minute, is this what I really want my night to look like? And with some of those, those bath salts, there was actually up in the gorge, right after we had finished filming the first documentary, they had a round of like a couple hundred overdoses at one of their shows. And that was one of the first times that they had hit Bunk Police up and been like, hey, like, we know we were kind of rude to you, but like, would you like to come back? We have this fish show, and we think it would be great to have a presence here. They were seeking to re-legitimize after a very bad experience. And we showed up there, and everyone at that show was so warm, welcoming, open to the idea, fascinated by this whole world of protection that they could get their hands on. We also had, at the time, an old British training parachute that was like pink. And we had one of those big, bright LED grow lights illuminating it. So at the end of this fish show, we have what looks like a giant mushroom glowing in the dark tent. And all of the fish fans just kind of flocked to it like moths to the light and had all these questions. But that was one of the times when I realized, wow, when everyone's on board, this can work really well. We can forestall a lot of these potentially horrible experiences.
Now we might be talking a little fast for the average listener here. The Gorge is a big 20,000 seat venue in Washington State.
Yes,
correct. And they have big festivals there. They have a campground adjoining it, so I could see. And people stay there for 2 and 3 and 4 days at a time.
Yeah, their big festival at the time, at least, was Sasquatch, was what it was called.
I've heard about that, yeah, and I heard there was some issues. But you get issues with any you get a bunch of people together, there's going to be problems. Even a Taylor Swift show, somebody's going to get hurt, or something. And we mentioned Lost Lands, which is a big electronic music festival in the state of Ohio every year, right? And you guys have been to that as well.
Yeah, and actually that first time, that was one of the biggest splashes was when we tested someone, they said, oh, hey, we've got a bunch of Molly. And we tested it. And it was bath salts. And the reaction that we heard from them was that they had come from Canada and that they had loaded up $4,000 of what they thought was Molly, brought it in, only to find out that it was not, that the whole thing was bunk and that they had essentially been taken.
Bath salts. I've heard of that happening. Is it legitimately just bath salt? Do you even get high on it?
No, it's a term that was used because when they were trying to flout the law, they would show up in gas stations, etc., as quote unquote bath salts. They're a synthetic cathinone, and the cathinone is a drug that grows out of this plant that you find in the Horn of Africa, and it's kind of like a stimulant, and these different formulations that they found had different effects. Some had an MDMA-like effect. And so it took off because it was really cheap. You could produce it, in anywhere. And at the time, you could just order it online. You didn't even need the dark web. You could find a bag of mephedrone for like $100 for 1,000 grams. And so the profit motive immediately revealed itself. We were like, oh, this is why they're doing it. MDMA is expensive. And when you buy this, you can now sell it as MDMA, and then you have to sell it at the MDMA prices, or else someone's going to suspect that something is wrong with what you're selling if you come in with a really cheap price.
Right.
So, they're buying it for a penny and selling it for $100. The motive shows itself immediately.
So people shouldn't do that drug at all.
There are other better ways to go about your recreational experiences if that's what you choose to do. The biggest thing that we're here for is to arm you with as much information as possible so that you can make the best decisions, and more to the point, that if you make a bad decision, it's not going to ruin your life and prevent you from learning and growing to make better decisions later.
That's great. Well, before we wind the show up, is there any crazy stories you want to tell, or did we cover it all?
One of the times at Bonnaroo, walking around, and there was a guy there asking if anyone wanted cocaine. And he would ask if they wanted hard, crack rocks or soft powder cocaine. And someone said they wanted soft, and he just took his bag of crack and thwapped it against a tree until it crushed it into a powder, and then was like, okay, here. And just one of those moments of like, wow, this is truly the Wild West that we're living in. Like there's no guardrails here.
Wasn't there a thing where security was trying to shut the Bunk Police down, but then there was a protest by the fans, not protesting you guys, but defending you guys and protesting against, is that a story?
So that was a more recent one. I wasn't there for that one, but that is kind of the oppositional forces that you meet, are that the people at the festival love that we're there, love that we're offering them tools to save themselves, to protect themselves, to have a better time, to clean up the area around them. But then you have the festival coming in and wanting to take that away. And, no one likes having something like that. Once you get used to the idea that there's someone who's got your back, you get a little upset if someone tries to remove them.
Well, I think it's a beautiful service and product that the Bunk Police are providing. We talked for a whole hour here. Didn't play much music, few songs, but I want to thank you guys for coming in. For doing all you do. It's Kyle Peters and Adam Octor from the Bunk Police. You can find them at bunkpolice.com. And they have an online store, all their information, links to these wonderful documentaries. And the new documentary coming out in April, well, I'm one of the guys getting interviewed on there. So I'm glad I could help you out.
Thank you for having us. It's been just a great experience all around.
All right. And then we're wrapping it up, and you're heading to the Kansas City, and you're flying back to Los Angeles?
I am headed home tonight.
All right. Well, thanks for coming here to Lake the Ozarks at Dam Radio. We'll see you next week on Jimmy Tebeau's Dam Radio Show.